Today we'll discuss about UTI in children. UTI is quite common in children, especially neonates and infants. If we don't treat properly, it might lead to scarring, and sometimes it might lead to kidney damage and might require dialysis also. That's why we should be careful while treating UTI. Important thing is proper diagnosis before starting medication. Coming to definition, presence of significant bacteria in presence of symptoms at any level of urinary tract infection. If that is in urethra, that is called urethritis. If that is in bladder, that is called cystitis. If that involves upper urinary tracts, parenchyma, that is called pyelonephritis. What is the terminology? What is uncomplicated UTI? This is infection in host without any underlying renal or urological disease. What is complicated UTI? Presence of infection in setting of underlying structural, medical or neurological disease. Here the treatment is very important. If you don't treat properly, it might lead to damage. What is recurrent UTI? Presence of 2 or more episodes of symptomatic UTI is called recurrent urinary tract infection. Coming to asymptomatic or covered bacteria, this is because of colonization of urinary tract with usual commensal uropathogens. Here, usually kids will not have any symptoms. That's why there is no need to treat these patients. What is the underlying pathogenesis in UTI? This is usually most of the times because of ascending bacterial infection, except in neonates. Sometimes in neonates, it might be because of hematogenic spread, also because of sepsis. But still in neonates, commonest route is ascending bacterial infection only. What happens here? If infection is reaching upper urinary tract, means parenchyma, this parenchymal infection leads to inflammatory response. But to contain this infection, usually kids develop scarring. That's why proper and timely treatment is very important. What are the host defense mechanisms? Intermittent and complete emptying of bladder is very important. And bactericidal secretions from uroepithelial cells inhibits bacterial adherence. This is also very important. Especially in neonates and infants up to 6 months of age, breastfeeding is very, very important. This also gives immunity and prevents infection in small neonates and infants. What are the predisposing factors? Most of the times, this is because of incomplete bladder emptying. It might be because of viscoureteric reflux. What happens here? Urine goes in reverse direction. Again, that comes down, reaches bladder. Then most of the times, usually they'll have posterior residual volume that leads to infection and presence of voiding dysfunction or maybe urogenic bladder. These are the things usually leads to incomplete bladder emptying. And any sick child, because of multi-organ involvement, such as if child is having catheter in place, that is also one of the reasons for infection. Or presence of any anatomical abnormalities like ureterocele, post-urethral walls, or as we discussed VO, these are also commonest thing which leads to UTI. And now so many kids we are seeing with constipation, and this is leading to recurrent urinary tract infection. That's why treatment of constipation is very important. Here, the proper history is so important to diagnose. Usually, parents won't give this information. You have to elicit. If constipation is there, the treatment of constipation is very, very important. And if child is using antibiotics for a long time, that is also one of the reasons of recurrent urinary tract infections. Coming to VUR, it might be primary or secondary. Usually, primary reflux, most of the times, 80 to 90%, it will resolve within first decadal life, most of the times before 5 years itself. But coming to secondary reflux, this is secondary to elevated intravesicular pressure. It might be because of voiding dysfunction or maybe because of obstruction like PUV or presence of neurogenic bladder. Here, resolution is less predictable. If you don't treat the underlying disease, obviously they'll have persistent reflux It leads to damage of kidneys. Sometimes they require dialysis and transplantation also. What is the incidence? Coming to VUR, usual general population it will be around 1 to 2%. In less than 1 year kids, if child is having UTI, usually more than 50% of kids they'll have VUR. That's why infants with symptomatic UTI, proper diagnosis and treatment is very important. In adolescent, it comes to around 5%. What is the clinical presentation? Coming to signs and symptoms in neonates and kids less than 3 months. Usually they'll have fever, vomitings, lethargy, failure to thrive. Sometimes they'll have unstable temperatures, and sometimes they'll have persistence of physiological jaundice also. Hematuria sometimes offensive urine. Coming to bigger kids, older children or infants or kids more than 3 months, usually they'll have fever, vomitings, failure to thrive, hematuria. Along with that, usually they'll complain of frequency. Sometimes they'll complain of dysuria also, and abdominal pain sometimes along with groin tenderness. If these symptoms are there, always we have to evaluate further to rule out UTI. What are the complications? Any child with recurrent UTI, if you don't treat properly, it leads to renal scarring. Usually in kids with recurrent UTI, chance of scarring is 20 to 30%. If scarring is there, that leads to hypertension in future. That's why we should be careful. So these are the complications. With number of UTIs, if recurrent UTIs are there, obviously chances of scarring will go up. What is the prevalence? In neonates, usually UTIs will be more in males because of periurethral flora, because of uncircumcision. If circumcision, if you do, it prevents infection. Because colonization of bacteria will see around the periurethra, that is one of the reasons in neonates, especially in males. Whereas in infants and children, after 1 month, usually this is more common in girls, around 8% you will see UTI, whereas in boys it is around 1%. How to diagnose UTI? This is quite simple. Simple urine analysis, CUV and urine culture gives lots of information. But proper collection of urine is very, very important. So how to collect urine? Various methods are there. If we are dealing with a small baby, neonate or infant, either suprapubic aspirate is quite difficult or bladder catheterization. These are two important things. Back sample usually shows contamination. That's why don't collect urine through back, especially in infants less than 1 year. If kid is more than 1 year, you can try midstream clean catch sample. If you're not able to collect the urine, back sample also you can send for analysis, but this is only for exclusion. If that is negative, that rules of infection. But back sample that shows positive, always you have to confirm by doing either bladder catheterization technique or midstream sample, or in neonates and infants, either bladder catheterization or suprapubic aspirate. Urine culture is always gold standard to diagnose UTI. Isolation of single pathogen in culture, if count is more than 10 to the power 5, that is suggestive of urinary tract infection. In simple urine analysis, presence of leukocyte esterase, nitrate also gives information about urinary tract infection. Gram stain is also reliable screening to diagnose UTI. So urinary microscopy, if leukocytes are more than 5 in high power field in a centrifugal sample, in presence of symptoms is suggestive of UTI. More than 10 leukocytes in an uncentrifuged sample in presence of symptoms again suggestive of UTI. What are the commonest pathogens? Most of the times this is because of E. coli or Klebsiella proteus. Sometimes it might be because of Pseudomonas, Staphylococcus epidermidis, or Enterococcus or Enterobacter. Coming to what are the pitfalls in management? Usually, especially in neonates and infants, usually they present with non-specific signs and symptoms. Sometimes they'll have only fever. Sometimes they won't take feeds. Sometimes they'll have failure to thrive or persistent vomiting. If these symptoms are there, always do urine analysis to diagnose UTI. Because during first 1 year, If you don't treat UTI aggressively, if reflux is there, obviously it leads to scarring, and in future that leads to damage. So we should be very, very careful. So UTI should not be diagnosed in presence of few cells in urine sample. Symptoms should be there, and culture should show some specific organism. Even count also should be more than 10 to the power of 5. And other important thing is delaying in processing after collecting the urine sample. If you don't do proper processing after collecting the sample, if you wait for more than 30 minutes, obviously you will have sometimes false positive report. That's why proper sampling and doing immediately the investigation is very, very important. As we discussed, method of urine collection is also very important thing here, especially back sample is not a good model. So coming to the counts, if you do suprapubic aspiration, gram-negative bacilli any number, the probability of infection will be more than 99%. Presence of gram-positive cocci more than 10 to the power of 3 is also suggestive of infection. Collection through transurethral catheterization, 10 to the power of 5, likely because of infection. Definitely we should treat. If that is in between 10 to the power of 4 to 10 to the power of 5, infection is likely, child is having symptoms, we should treat. If in between 10 to the power of 3 to 10 to the power of 4, this is not suggestive of infection but suspicious, always is better to repeat again. 10 to the power of 3 rules out infection. Clean cat sample, boys, more than 10 to the power of 4, infection is very likely. Symptoms are there, we should treat. Girls, more than 10 to the power of 5, yes, infection is very likely, we should treat. If count is in between 10 to the power of 4 to 10 to the power of 5, this is suspicious, we should repeat the test again. If counts are more than 10 to the power of 5, then we should treat. 10 to the power of 4, infection is unlikely. If you see growth of two pathogens, even though count is significant, more than 10 to the power of 5, there is no need to treat two organisms. Always you have to repeat again the culture. If second culture shows significant growth of one organism, then according to culture, treat with the proper. And again, as we discussed, intermediate growth means 10 to the power of 3, 10 to the power of 4. Even though single organism is there, usually there is no need to treat. Again, if you have collected through bag, chances of contamination is around 62%, whereas through catheterization it comes to around 9%. Infants, where you have collected the sample through bag, most of the times 4 to 5 folds more likely to have unnecessary treatment and radiological investigations, and 12-fold more likely to have unnecessary hospitalization. That's why we should be careful. To diagnose UTI along with CUN culture, the other simple investigation is ultrasonography. But this is observer dependent. Radiologist should be competent to do ultrasound, especially in babies. But this is not reliable to diagnose VUR or renal scarring. For that, we have to do MCG and DMSL later on. But ultrasound gives information about the renal size, shape, bladder size, configuration, and bladder wall thickness. And it gives information about the presence of LV calcium dilatation or ureteric dilatation, means hydronephrosis or hydrourethronephrosis. Coming to other important investigation, MCUG. This is also gold standard to diagnose reflux in any child with recurrent UTI or symptomatic. But this is one of the most stressful investigations because we have to catheterize the child and sometimes you might introduce infection. That's why we should be careful. Always you have to do MCUG under antibiotic cover. But this gives information about the urinary tract. It gives information about the grading and severity of reflux, and it identifies bladder diverticula, it measures bladder capacity and gives information about the urethral profile also. But when to do MCUG? Previously, we used to wait after treating infection. We used to wait up to 3 to 4 weeks after treatment, and we used to do after that MCG. But now what we can do, latest guidelines, MCG we can do after treatment. Like suppose if child is in hospital, if you are giving antibiotic, Continue antibiotics, give 4 or 5 days. Repeat again CUV. If CUV is normal, if child is having normal CRP, no evidence of infection. If pus cells are less than 5, then you can go for MCUG at that time. So you can do MCUG at the end of antibiotic course. There is no need to wait up to 3 to 4 weeks after treatment. And other important thing, any child with reflux, always we have to do DMSA scan also to rule out scarring. So it gives information about, if you are doing DMSA immediate after infection, it gives information about pyelonephritis. If child is having acute pyelonephritis, usually in DMSA you will see photopenic areas. But usually any child with UTI after treatment, after doing MCUG, if MCUG is showing reflux, we'll wait up to 3 months at least. We do DMSA only after 3 months. Because even after acute pyelonephritis, to form a scar, it takes at least 3 months. That's why it's better to wait up to 3 months. Not only about scars, it gives information about differential function also. But if child is having duplex kidneys, it leads to confusion sometimes, because duplex kidneys, it looks like scarring sometimes. So if duplex kidneys are there, then it's better to do MRU or ethylene 16 scan. That gives proper information. DMS is not useful if lower urinary tract infection is there. Coming to urodynamic study, when do you want to do urodynamic study? This is quite important. If any kid is having reflux, if that is secondary reflux, secondary to PUV or neurogenic bladder, because if this is PUV or neurogenic bladder, sometimes they'll have persistent reflux, it will not resolve. This is because of high pressure in the bladder. So in these situations, always we have to do urodynamic study. So it measures how well the bladder and sphincter source urine and releases urine. It is useful in urogenic bladder if child is having voiding dysfunction or in secondary VUR patients. But it's quite difficult to do UDS in kids less than 2 years, because they won't cooperate. Here we have to put catheter. So that's why they'll have chance of infection. That's why UDS we have to do under antibiotic cover. We should be very, very careful. So coming to VUR, usually we will have grades 1 to 5. Most of the times, grade 1 to grade 2, 90% it will resolve. Coming to grade 3, 90% it will resolve. Whereas in grade 4 and grade 5, chance of resolution will be around 40 to 50%. Here we should be careful. So how to treat infection, UTI? Even though first UTI, if that is symptomatic, as we discussed before, we should do proper evaluation. If child is less than 1 year, we should do ultrasound. Even ultrasound is normal, then definitely we should do MCUG and DMSA also. Sometimes MCUG might be normal also, but if child is having symptomatic UTI, always you should do DMSA also, because in 10 to 50% of kids, you might miss reflux in MCUG. And if you don't give antibiotic prophylaxis, especially during first 1 year, it leads to scarring. That's why doing DMSA is very, very important, even MCUG is not. If kid is around 1 to 5 years, first important thing is we have to do ultrasound. If ultrasound is normal, but if child is having symptomatic UTI, always we have to do DMSA scan also. If DMSA shows any scarring, then we should do MCUG. If child is more than 5 years, do ultrasound. If ultrasound is normal, no need to do anything. If ultrasound is abnormal, like if hydronephrosis is there, or if child is having cystitis, bladder wall thickening, or if child is having posterior residual volume, then obviously we should do MCUG and DMSA. So what are the principles of treatment? Always we have to start antibiotic after obtaining urine sample. Send CU and culture, then start antibiotic. Based on the culture sensitivity, if required, we can change the antibiotic later on. But the drug what you are using should have minimal side effects, and it should reach to high concentrations in the urine after administration. If you are dealing a kid with UTI, if child is more than 3 months, if child is not septic, CRP is not high, child is taking pills properly, or if child is more than 1 year, you can treat with oral antibiotics also according to culture sensitivity. So children with complicated UTI or infants less than 3 months, obviously it's better to use IV antibiotics to prevent pyelonephritis and scarring in future. But in bigger kids, as we discussed, we can give oral antibiotics also. But urinary antiseptics such as naltrexone acid or nitrofurantoin should not be used as a drug of choice in upper urinary tract infections. What is the duration of therapy? In infants and children with complicated UTI, usually we have to give 10 to 14 days. Whereas simple infection, 7 days is enough. Coming to prophylaxis, when do you want to use prophylaxis? And what is the ideal antibiotic? Usually, the prophylaxis medicine should be effective, non-toxic, and you should have few side effects. And to not alter the endogenous bacterial flora or induce development of bacterial resistance. So when do you want to start prophylaxis? Any child, you have treated the infection, but if you want to wait for MCUG, before doing MCUG, if gap is there like 2 to 3 weeks, that time we should start antibiotic prophylaxis to prevent infection again. Or if child is having reflux, obviously we have to start antibiotic prophylaxis. But how many days you have to give prophylaxis, that depends upon the severity of the reflux. But first 1 year, despite of severity, whatever it is, grade 1, grade 2 or grade 5, we should give antibiotic prophylaxis. Usually up to 2 years we do give. After that, if child is having grade 2 or lesser grade, then there is no need of any prophylactic medication. But if child is having higher grade reflux, like grade 4 or grade 5, we have to give antibiotic prophylaxis sometimes up to 5 years also. Or if child is having scarring, then we have to go for surgery also, either deflux or ureteric implantation. What are the prophylactic medications? Commonest medicine is tremoxazole, trimethoprim, usually 1 to 2 mg per kg. But avoid this in infants less than 3 months or child is having G6PD deficiency. Nitrofurantoin is also 1 to 2 mg. This is per kg. Usually it causes gastrointestinal upset, but avoid in kids less than 3 months or G6PD deficiency is there. Or if child is having renal insufficiency, it's better to avoid this medication. If child is less than 3 months, then you can use either cephalexin or cefaclor. Usual dose is 10 mg. So prophylaxis, where do you want to not to use prophylaxis? Presence of PUV, presence of neurogenic bladder or stones. Because if you use unnecessary prophylaxis, it leads to colonization and formation of resistant organisms. Now we'll go for case scenarios. This is about a patient, 1 year 6 months old girl with a history of recurrent infections. Urine culture has grown E. coli, has history of fever, dysuria, vomiting and abdominal pain, has constipation, has plenty of pus cells. Culture is showing E. coli more than 10 to the power of 5, CRP is high, WBC count is high, urea creatinine are normal. Ultrasound is showing bilateral hydronephrosis. Right side that is 10.7, left side 11.2 millimeters with cystitis. Bladder wall thickening is 3.2 millimeters. More than 3 millimeters is significant. So we have treated initially with IV antibiotics because CRP is high, child is having high grade fevers. Later on we have changed it to oral antibiotics. What do you want to do? So we have treated the infection, but child is having bilateral hydronephrosis. So obviously the child requires MCG scan. When do you want to do? Already we discussed. So during the same hospital course, at the end of the therapy, we have done MCG. MCG showing bilateral grade 3 reflux. We have to start antibiotic prophylaxis or not in this case. And when do you want to do the MSA scan? So obviously because grade is grade 3, definitely we should start antibiotic prophylaxis, but wait for DMSA after treatment, after starting antibiotic prophylaxis, after completing 3 months of antibiotic prophylaxis course, do DMSA. What are the DMSA scan report? We should continue antibiotic prophylaxis because child is having grade 3. So DMSA we have done, that is showing upper pole scar in right kidney, but kidney differential function is quite good. Right kidney is 46%, left kidney is 54%. So this is quite good. So simple scar, there is no need to worry at all. But how many days do you want to continue antibiotic prophylaxis? These kids, what we have to do? Continue antibiotic prophylaxis. If child is having no UTI episodes in between, if there no breakthrough UTI, no need to worry at all. Wait another 1 year, repeat DMS and MCUG. If DMSA, if no further scarring, if reflux comes down to less than 2 grade or 2 grade also, sometimes it may resolve also. But the reflux less than 2 grade, even reflux is there also, you can stop antibiotics. If that is resolved completely, there is no need to worry at all. But even presence of grade 2 in kids more than 2 years, you can stop antibiotic prophylaxis if scarring is not much. Is there any role of surgery here? No, because not much of scarring, only single scar is there. So here we can wait. Only thing is continue antibiotic prophylaxis and wait and watch. This is about another patient, 2 8 6 months old boy with history of recurrent UTI. Urine culture has grown Klebsiella. Child has fever, dysuria, vomiting, abdominal pain, and hematuria. Plenty of pus cells are there. Klebsiella is there in urine. CRP is bit high. Creatinine, urea are normal. Electrolytes are okay. Bicarb is also normal. Ultrasound is showing 2 stones. The size is around 3 to 4 millimeters in right mid and lower port. There is no hydronephrosis. What else do you want to do? So the child is having recurrent UTI, but stones are there, and there is no hydronephrosis. Do you want to do MCG here? Absolutely no. We can wait because here the pathology child is having stones, so we have to avoid it for stones by these are. So what are the things you want to do now? Do 24-hour urine collection for calcium, uric acid, oxalate, citrate, and creatinine. We have done all these investigations, and the investigations are suggestive of hypercalciuria. So what do you want to do now? Any child with hypercalciuria, to prevent further stone formation, or if you want to treat, sometimes if we give lots of water and if we start potassium citrate, the stones might dissolve also. That's why proper hydration is important. If infection is there, treat with proper antibiotic, give potassium citrate. At the same time, you have to avoid few food stuff like we have to avoid spicy salty food, restrict non-veg, don't give milk more than 300 ml in a day. You can give around 300 ml. Avoid dry fruits, nuts, coffee, tea, spinach, and tomato. These are very, very important. If you follow all those things, if small stones are there, obviously it will resolve. So no need to worry at all. This is the same child, but the child has polyuria and polydipsia and has failure to thrive also. What to do now? The investigations are showing urea is 48, creatinine is 0.6. Electrolytes, sodium is okay, but the child is having hypokalemia. Potassium is 2.9, chloride is also bit high, 109. Calcium is normal and phosphate is normal. So the child is having hypokalemia and hyperchloremia. We have done further evaluation. Child is having metabolic acidosis. pH is 7.21, bicarb is 13. And she is showing RBC around 20 to 30. First cells are plenty. pH is 6.2. Here pH is also very, very important for diagnosis. We'll discuss again. What else you want to do here? So the child is having polyuria, polydipsia, failure to thrive is there, metabolic acidosis is there, along with hypokalemia and hyperchloremia. So what is the possibility? I think you will be knowing the answer here. So this case definitely requires further evaluation to diagnose a specific disease. We have done blood anion gap also, that is normal 14. So this is normal anion gap, metabolic acidosis. And urine anion gap is positive here. Now ultrasound is showing nephrocalcinosis and child is having hypercalcemia. Calcium creatinine ratio more than 2 is suggestive of hypercalcemia. So the child is having UTI. By this time we will be knowing we know now this is renal tubular acidosis because child is having hypokalemia, metabolic acidosis, and that is normal anion gap, and urinary pH is 6.2. That is also important here because we have to distinguish between distal and proximal. We have to see whether this is distal or proximal. In distal renal tubular acidosis, usually they'll have nephrocalcinosis and urinary pH always be more than 5.5. So here pH is 6.2 and child is having nephrocalcinosis. So this is distal. So here how to manage this case? Proper hydration is very, very important, and always they require potassium supplements in the form of potassium citrate, and they require bicarb also. If we give all these medicines, obviously they'll gain weight and height properly. But important thing is these kids usually they come to hospital with dehydration Always correction of acidosis and potassium is very important for normal growth of the child. Once nephrocalcinosis is there, that is not reversible. So we should be very careful. The last case, this is about 3 months old male infant admitted with urosepsis, has bilateral hydrourethronephrosis and bladder wall thickening is there. So small baby hydrourethronephrosis is there, bladder wall thickening. Obviously, we have to do MCUG. We have done MCUG, and that is suggestive of posturethral walls. Along with PUV, baby is having bilateral grade 2 fever also. What to do now? Obviously, this required the child requires immediate fulguration. So we have done cystoscopic fulguration, but this child was having recurrent UTI. That's why we have started antibiotic prophylaxis after treatment. What else you want to do? We discussed before, only presence of PUV without recurrent UTI, usually we won't give antibiotic prophylaxis. But here, child is having recurrent UTI, so this child requires antibiotic prophylaxis. So we have started that. What else you want to do? We have repeated MCUG at 1 year of age. That was showing persistent grade 5 reflux, but urethral profile is normal. We have done DMSA. DMSA showing bilateral scarred kidneys with mild impairment. Ultrasound also we have done, that is showing persistent bilateral hydrourethronephrosis with post residual volume of 50 ml. 50 ml is very much significant here. So what is happening here? So child is having incomplete emptying of bladder. So always this gets requires urodynamic study to look for. One thing is capacity of the bladder. Another thing is whether child is having any bladder discharge. So that's why UDS is important. When do you want to do UDS? Usually first 2 years, usually they won't cooperate. So till the time what you have to do? Because the child is having high hydrourethronephrosis because of high vesical pressure with PVR of 50 ml, always is better to start anticholinergics. Usually oxybutynin, that is propan. So we have started. And once child is 2 years, we have done UDS also, that is showing small capacity bladder with high pressure. Then how to proceed further? So the child is having impairment, mild impairment because of bilateral diffuse scarring in the kidneys and persistence of high grade reflux, grade 5 reflux in both kidneys. Even though urethral profile is normal in repeat MCUG, he is having secondary BUR, that is high grade with small capacity, high pressure bladder. How to proceed further? These kids, despite of anticholinergic medication and treatment of voiding dysfunction, usually they'll proceed to CKD. That's why we should be careful. These kids requires regular follow-up, and usually in future they require renal transplantation. But before going to renal transplantation, always we have to do bladder augmentation. If you do transplantation in a kid with small capacity bladder, obviously transplantation will fail. That's why before transplantation, these kids require bladder augmentation. Then we can proceed for transplantation in future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. That was a very concise and a practical approach to the UTI. So the next talk will be by Dr. Linatha Reddy. She is a consultant pediatric endocrinologist at various branches of Rainbow Children's Hospital. So today's topic will be on myths and facts about the hypothyroidism. The questions related to the UTI and the current topic will be taken at the end of this lecture. Now I hand over the mic to Madam Dr. Linatha Reddy.
Can you see me? Can you see the presentation?
No, ma'am.
No, ma'am.
I want it here. So just
Yeah, ma'am. You're able to see me, ma'am.
okay. I'll just a second. Can you see it now?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So good evening and welcome everyone. We're talking about hypothyroidism today, and as you're aware, it is a common condition that we come across in our pediatric clinics, as well as a lot of thyroid profiles are being doing commonly because of the way hypothyroidism presents. So how I'm going to talk today is just highlight the common types of hypothyroidism that present in pediatric age group, and then tell you the myths that I've come across in my clinical practice through cases, and then just give you a flow chart about how you can proceed when you get an abnormal thyroid profile. So the most common one is congenital hypothyroidism. As we're all aware, it is a common preventable cause for intellectual disability. Newborn screening in our country is not universal. We know IAP is strongly advocating that the newborn screening be included in India's public health policy. At the moment, it isn't. Screening will have a huge impact on public health with a positive cost to benefit ratio, and the incidence is much higher in India. Worldwide, it is about 1 in 3,000 to 4,000. In India, the studies have shown that it could be anything between 2.1 for every 1,000 to 1 in every 1,900. So when do we do screening? The time of screening is either we do cord blood or at 72 hours postnatally. If we do it in between, there's a high chance of getting false positive results, thereby stressing out the family and needing to do more analysis. If your screening test is abnormal, then you need to do a venous sample for definitive testing. Juvenile hypothyroidism includes a spectrum of thyroid hormone deficiencies, which usually present beyond 2 years of life. The most common, it is one of the most common endocrine disorder that we see in children. And autoimmune hypothyroidism is the most common, constituting almost 70% of the juvenile hypothyroidism cases. So what are the myths that I've come across during my practice is that the smaller the baby, you require smaller the dose. A lot of the time, parents ask, how come my child has a dose that is almost the same as what I'm taking? Normal TSH rules out hypothyroidism. While on treatment, if your TSH is normal, it means that you can start reducing the dose. Delayed puberty is the only pubertal related feature that can present in hypothyroidism. Obesity is the most common presentation. This is something that comes across very often. A lot of parents actually do the profile and come saying that it might be the reason for their child being obese. And ectopic glands have to be surgically removed. So we'll just go through to try and tell you what the fact is about these myths. So the first case is a 1-month-old infant who presented to his pediatrician with a history of poor feeding, prolonged jaundice, born at term with a birth weight of 2.8 kilos. What investigations would you consider? Well, the pediatrician considered a liver function test with bilirubin as well as a thyroid profile. So LFTs were normal. Unconjugated bilirubin was slightly raised, which is not unusual in a lot of babies. But the TSH was more than 150 with the T4, which was 2.6. So what needs to be done? So ideally, you would start the treatment, which is with levothyroxine, but you'd also consider imaging. Imaging such as a simple ultrasound scan or your technetium uptake scan. It is not necessary to delay your treatment for any of these investigations, and your technetium uptake scan has to be done within 5 days of starting treatment. If not, you will get false reports. So this infant was started on 12.5 micrograms per day. So the repeat thyroid profile done 3 weeks later showed that the TSH was still more than 150 and T4 was 2.2. This is how the baby looked like. This is not the same baby. So I had seen this baby at 2 months of age with history of poor feeding, lethargy, constipation was still persisting. On examination, there was microglossia, very hypotonic, very coarse facial features, periorbital puffiness. So as we noticed at 3 weeks following treatment, the TSH was still more than 150. So we increased the dose to 37.5 micrograms per day. And the repeat TSH was done 2 weeks later. The TSH had come down to 46 and the T4 had improved. So we had continued on the same dose. And repeated again after 2 weeks, which was around 12 weeks of age, and the TSH was 36 and T4 was 8.6. Usually by now your TSH should have come down further. So definitely the symptoms had improved. The child had shown a lot of change. So we increased the dose to 37.5 and 50 micrograms on alternate days, and repeated it again after 2 weeks, which resulted in a normal TSH, and advised repeat again after 2 months. So what is important is that diagnosing hypothyroidism within the first 2 weeks of life and starting treatment will result in near normal cognitive outcome. The thing that because the baby is small, requires a small dose is false. The smaller the baby, the higher the dose you require. And we usually start them off on 10 to 15 micrograms per kilogram per day. I would probably go towards the higher side than on the lower side. And all of these babies required to be have a repeat test within 2 weeks. And usually I would round up the number. So term baby, probably I would start on 37.5 micrograms. Slightly underweight infant, I would probably start at 25 micrograms. And we don't, it is ideally you crush the tablet rather than dissolving it in water. Crush it, add a little bit of express breast milk and give it before the first feed in the morning. So universal screening is something that I think the IAP and the Endocrine Society of India are working towards, so that it becomes a universal thing in our country as well. So case 2 is a 9-month-old male who was referred for poor growth, reduced muscle tone, and delayed motor development. The pediatrician had investigated in detail. Parents had informed me that the thyroid profile was normal. So we had gone through all the reports, and these were the thyroid results. 3 months, 5 months, and 8 months, all the TSHs were within the normal range. So what was missing from my point? Well, in this case, on all 3 occasions, it was only a TSH which was done, and a free T4 and a T4 was not done. So I repeated the test with a free T4, which was 0.2, TSH was 2.2. This is telling us that this child has hypothyroidism and suggestive of a central hypothyroidism, because your TSH is inappropriately low for your free T4. So when you come across a picture of central hypothyroidism, you always need to make sure that this infant doesn't have adrenal insufficiency. So we did a cortisol, which was 1.4 micrograms per DL. A random basal cortisol level doesn't rule out adrenal insufficiency. But if I get a cortisol which is around 6, 7, 8 or higher, at least I know that there is a reasonable function of the adrenal gland. So because the cortisol here was on the lower side, we did a synactin test, which post-synactin showed increase to 6 micrograms per DL. Usually you need to have a response of above 20, at least above 18. So this is suggesting that you have adrenal insufficiency secondary to ACTH insufficiency. So what is your diagnosis here? So you have central hypothyroidism with ACTH deficiency. So this means that this is panhypopituitarism. Now here in this situation, you would not start treatment with thyroxine or levothyroxine initially. You would want to start treatment with hydrocortisone at around 8 to 10 milligrams per meter square per day. The reason being that if you start Thyronorm before correcting adrenal insufficiency, it will what happens is once you start normalizing your thyroid levels, it unmasks the protective protection it gives for the adrenal insufficiency, and then these infants can go into adrenal crisis. So normal TSH does not rule out hypothyroidism. It's very important in pediatrics that we always do a T4 or at least a free T4 or a complete profile. In adults, a lot of the times they only do TSH, and but in pediatrics, it's very important that we do the whole profile. In children with neurological problems or presenting with hypotonia, I tend to directly do a free T4, because not knowing what the neurological issue is, does it have an impact on the pituitary and hypothalamus or not, I'm not sure. So I always do a free T4 and a TSH. Now, if your T4 is low with a normal TSH, then you do a free T4, because it's not always easy to do free T4. A lot of labs don't have that access, and I have to send it to an outside lab. But if your T4 is low, then definitely do a free T4, because you want to rule out a central hypothyroidism where your free T4 will be low. But if your free T4 is normal, this is a thyroid hormone binding globulin deficiency, and this usually does not require any treatment. So next case is a 5-year-old who presented with a history of weight gain and constipation. T4 was 5.9, TSH was 64. So what would you do next? So you would send off for thyroid antibodies, consider doing an ultrasound scan. At this age, an ultrasound scan is sufficient, and you would start treatment. This is what happened. Started on levothyroxine of about 50 micrograms per day, which is a reasonable dose. At this age, it is anywhere between 50 to 100 micrograms per day that they require. The child was reviewed after 3 months, and that time the T4 was 14.3, which is just a touch above what would be normal. Normal cutoff would be around 13 to 13.5. TSH was 2.6. So what next? So I would have done something different here, but here the as the TSH was normal and the T4 was above range, the dose was reduced down to 24 micrograms per day, and the plan was to repeat the thyroid profile in a couple of months. Parents got concerned a couple of weeks down the line, and at around 2 months had done a repeat thyroid profile and had come to see me because the child had again started to become a bit lethargic and the constipation reoccurred. So we repeated thyroid profile. T4 was 6.1, TSH had gone up to 42. So we increased the dose back to 50 micrograms per day, repeated it again in about 6 weeks, and it was normal. Constipation had resolved, and the child had also lost 2 kilos because that presentation was touch on the heavier side. So normal TSH while on treatment means the dose is appropriate. It does not mean that we start reducing the dose. This is something that I've come across a lot of times when once the TSH is normal, the dose is halved. So even if you're reducing the dose, I would advise not to reduce it by half, only reduce it by 1/3. And the time when you should reduce the dose is when your TSH is less than 0.5, 0.6, then yes, you can consider reducing the dose. So in this case, the reason why the doctor might have reduced the doses because the T4 was on the higher side. T4 levels, the range changes throughout the day. And in this case, the family had told me that they had taken the tablet in the morning and a couple of hours later, they had got the test done. So most of the time we advise to get the test done before you take the tablet. Or if you've taken the tablet, then get it done later on in the day, or at least inform the doctor that you've taken the tablet and got the blood test done. Because your TSH is not going to change because you've taken a tablet or not taken a tablet for one day. It's based on at least a week values. So if you have a normal TSH, it most likely means your dose is appropriate. So the next case is a 6-year-old girl who presented with a history of severe abdominal pain and vomiting and had gone to see their pediatrician who, because the pain was so intense and the child was unconsolably crying and with vomiting, an ultrasound scan of the abdomen was done, which showed multicystic ovaries and a left ovary torsion. So left ovary had to be removed. Following the scan, the child was referred to a surgeon. They laparoscopically had a look. They found that the right ovary was also multicystic and the left ovary had torsion and unfortunately had to be removed. So this child was referred to me with the possibility that this might be early puberty or might lead to early menarche because the ovaries were multicystic. On examination, there was some B2, P1, A1 according to Tanner staging. So the breast development had just started. Height was on the 3rd centile, and when we speaking to the parents, they were of average height. So the child was a bit on the shorter side. And when our question, moms did mention that yes, recently I haven't noticed her growing as much as she was before. Her behavior had changed. She on and off, she was complaining of constipation. Her appetite had gone down. So what would you do next? So this child was referred for possible early puberty. There are subtle signs suggestive that this could be a hypothyroid case as well. What we usually do with any child who presents with puberty related issues, we always do a thyroid profile, whether we are suspecting delayed puberty or precocious puberty. So thyroid profile, LH, FSH, estradiol, and an ultrasound scan. We would also consider doing an X-ray to assess the bone age. So what were the results? The LH came back as less than 0.1, FSH was 1.2. These both are suggesting that this is not central precocious puberty. Estradiol was 24, which is usually less than 10. So this is just some labs will say less than 20, but this is just a touch on the high side. Scan showed still showed a right multicystic ovary. The thyroid profile showed a TSH of more than 150. TSH is very similar to FSH. So TSH, when present in excess, can go and bind to the FSH receptors on the ovary and start stimulating estrogen production, and on very rare occasions can lead to multicystic ovaries. And unfortunately, they don't present until they're quite big and twisted, and that's when they become painful, and that's how they present to us. Another girl who presented at 8 years was referred again for early menarche, had started spotting for a few days. History was there of breast size increasing over 4 to 6 months. There was no family history of early puberty or any thyroid illnesses. So again, as mentioned with the previous case, any child who presents with any pubertal related abnormalities, we always would consider investigation, including a thyroid profile. So what do? We did an LH, FSH, E2, TFTs, ultrasound scan, and as I said, we always do an X-ray of the left hand and wrist. So LH again was 0.1, FSH 2.2, estradiol was a bit higher here, but again, both the LH and FSH suggesting that this is not central precocious puberty. Thyroid profile was more than 150. So here, instead of causing multicystic ovaries, it actually induced formation of your endometrial lining and then resulted in withdrawal bleed, which presented as spotting. So precocious puberty, also called a pseudo-precocious puberty, can be a feature of hypothyroidism. Galactorrhea can also be a feature of hypothyroidism. As I mentioned, rarely multicystic ovaries can also present with hypothyroidism, without most of the other features being very prominent. So always do a thyroid profile when any abnormality related to puberty presents to you, even if it means oligomenorrhea or menorrhagia, we would still consider doing a thyroid profile. And you should also consider it when the progress of puberty is rapid or it's not fitting in what you would usually see. So case 6 is a 9-year-old boy who presented to his doctor with a history of sore throat and fever. So he examined his throat and found that there was some extra tissue or an extra mass on the right tonsil. When I asked the parents said they had never noticed it before. And this child didn't have any difficulty swallowing, breathing, or anything. So the doctor had referred to the surgeon. Surgeon advised removal of the right tonsil with the extra tissue, as it could be ectopic thyroid tissue. Parents got worried. They went back to the pediatrician, who referred to me. So we did an ultrasound scan on the neck, which showed that there was no thyroid gland. Thyroid profile showed that the TSH was 24. So we did a 99M technician uptake scan, which showed that the extra tissue uptake was high, suggesting that there was some thyroid tissue there. So here the question is, should this ectopic tissue thyroid gland be removed? Now this family again before coming to me, had gone to 2 or 3 other surgeons, and there was a mixed answer there. Another one said, yes, we should remove it. And another surgeon said, no, we don't need to remove it as it's not causing any problem. So what ideally should be done? So ideally, because the TSH was elevated, we started on levothyroxine. The child is doing well. Repeat thyroid profiles are normal. So ectopic thyroid tissue on its own wasn't causing any problem. Yes, when the child opened his mouth wide, you can see that big mass on his tonsil, but it wasn't causing any other issue for this child. So ectopic glands are rare, but they do present. Eventually, they do cause hypothyroidism, and replacement therapy is the only treatment that is needed. Surgical removal is not recommended, though there are some cases where adult women or adolescent teenagers who have got the surgery done for cosmetic reasons. But otherwise, it is only considered if there is bleeding, ulceration, severe local or respiratory symptoms of malignancy. The risk of malignancy of an ectopic gland becoming malignant is less than 1%. So in general, ectopic glands are to be left alone. So case 7 is about 2 cases, very similar age and presented. So the first one is a 7-year-old girl who presented with increase in weight, came to see me to find the possible cause for the weight gain. Second case was also a 7-year-old with weight gain, came to see me for the treatment of hypothyroidism as TSH was elevated. Parents felt it was the reason for her weight gain. So this is a growth chart. The one on the left side is a growth chart of the girl, case 1. If you can see, the weight is on the 75th centile and the height is just below the 3rd centile. 75th centile in general is not uncommon for most of the children, but in comparison to our height, yes, that the weight is relatively higher. The one on the right shows the second case where the weight is way above the 97th centile and the height is on the 97th centile. So 2 different parameters, but presenting with the same history of weight gain. So case 1 has loss of appetite, very quiet person, noted to have quite dry skin and was constipated. Case 2, always hungry, enjoys food, eats all her meals well, active in the house but very, very limited physical activity, normal skin and no constipation. So this history is quite different in both of them. So what happened with case 1? Case 1, TSH was more than 150 and T4 was 0.66. Antibodies were positive. While case 2, TSH was 8.2, T4 was 10.1, antibodies were negative. So what do we do? With the first one, yes, it is autoimmune hypothyroidism, started on levothyroxine, loss of appetite with short stature and relatively overweight, you should consider hypothyroidism. Endocrine cases usually present with weight gain, but you will also find a history of slow height velocity unless the whole disease or condition is rapidly progressing and where the impact hasn't been seen on the height. Increased TSH secondary to excess weight gain is a common presentation. We have a lot of children who, especially obese children, who get a thyroid profile done even without the advice of the pediatrician and come with a TSH which is around 7, 8, 9, and parents are confident that this is the reason, and once it's treated, the weight is going to disappear. That's not the case. Just because you've already put on so much of weight, your TSH will go up because it needs to produce more T4 for your body metabolism. So diet change and exercise is what is needed here. And weight gain plus height above the 50th centile is usually simple obesity. And in this case, the height was on the 97th centile. So this is a growth chart of the same children 6 months later. And you can see in case 1 that the weight has come down to 50. You will not see drastic weight reduction in children who have been started on levothyroxine. You will see some reduction, but they need to get into the diet, lots of physical activity to reduce their weight further or maintain their weight. What you can definitely see is an improvement in the child's height, which has now touched the 3rd centile. Hopefully she will do some improve her height. Catch-up growth is very difficult with hypothyroidism compared to growth hormone deficiency, and this is probably because the chondrocyte reserve is reduced because of the long-standing hypothyroidism. In the second case, you've noticed that the height is still on the 97th centile. The weight has come down a little bit. So repeated the thyroid profile 6 months later. The case 1, TSH is normal with a good T4. And case 2, also the TSH is normal with a good T4. So in case 2, we only made her do a lot of physical activity and change her diet. Improving your physical activity, reducing your weight even by 1 to 2 kilos, we've seen a marked drop in the TSH, and it usually comes down to normal. We don't tend to treat TSHs unless they're above 10 or you have a very low T4. Because most of these cases would be labeled as subclinical hypothyroidism. Subclinical treatment of subclinical hypothyroidism is quite controversial. There are a lot of physicians who don't treat it, like me included, until the TSH is way above 10. So obesity is not a common feature of hypothyroidism. It is more that if you calculated their BMI will be on the overweight side, and they look big because their height has been compromised. So, and these children have a reduced appetite with slow metabolism, and this makes their appear as if they are on the heavier side. Height is usually compromised in hypothyroidism. Mild increase in TSH is common in a lot of obese children and adolescents and doesn't warrant treatment, provided your T4 is in the normal range. So I'm just going to go through some flow charts just to see how you can manage these children with who present with either congenital hypothyroidism or juvenile hypothyroidism. So we'll go to the first is the congenital hypothyroidism. So as mentioned, heel prick is something that we would recommend. The heel prick or cord blood. Cord blood can be done in almost any setup, and the TSH can be analyzed by either of the methods. So if the TSH is above 20, then you need to be suspicious. If it's below 20, it's considered normal. So if your TSH is above 80, it warrants immediate venous sampling and starting of treatment. You're not going to be waiting for the result. Now, if your TSH is more than 40, then you would repeat your thyroid profile about 3 to 4 days later. So that's about 72 hours later to make sure any surge which has happened in the first 24 hours has settled down. And if it is still elevated, you would start treatment. Now, if the TSH is between 20 and 40, then you would repeat the TSH around 7 to 10 days of life. And usually, because most of us don't repeat a newborn dried blood sample and we do a venous sample, you would do your T4 or free T4 along with it. So if your TSH is still above 20 in an infant who is less than 2 weeks, or your TSH is above 10 at more than 2 weeks, you should consider treatment. So when do you consider treatment for venous sampling? So if you have a low T4, which is less than 8, or free T4, which is less than 1.1, irrespective of the TSH, you should consider treatment. Mild low T4 less than 10, or a low free T4 less than 1.17 with a TSH of more than 20 in an infant less than 2 weeks, you should start treatment. Or if you have mild T4 and free T4 with a TSH more than 10 in an infant more than 2 weeks, you should start treatment. If the infant is more than 3 weeks and the TSH is more than 10, regardless of what the T4 or free T4 is, treatment should be started. With preterm, very low birth weight, sick neonates, it is a little bit tricky. We usually would advise repeating the thyroid profiles before you start treatment. A lot of the preterm babies are sick preterm babies, so you will have a sick euthyroid where your free T4, T4, TSH are all low, so you repeat it. Even in a preterm, low birth weight infant, if you have a significantly elevated TSH and the repeat profile also shows a significantly elevated TSH, then you should consider treatment. So with acquired hypothyroidism, there are a lot of children who get thyroid profiles done for a variety of symptoms. And if you do your T3, T4 and TSH, or T4, TSH, or free T4 and TSH. Now, if you have a low T3, T4 with a normal or low TSH, then you've got to think about, is this central hypothyroidism? Is this thyroid binding, hormone binding globulin deficiency, or sick thyroid? If you do a free T4, it differentiates between central hypothyroidism and TBG deficiency. Sick thyroid, usually you'll have all three will be on the low side. Usually you have an infant who is having acute or a chronic illness, and you would repeat this once the child has recovered. Now you have a raised TSH with a normal T3 and T4. It is subclinical hypothyroidism. Usually less than 10 we don't treat. Sometimes even above 10 we wait and watch. But if it's sort of going in the upward direction, it is recommended that you start treatment. It is also worth doing thyroid antibodies at this stage, because if they're antibody positive, then it indicates that they're most likely going to become hypothyroid and you should start treatment. But if their antibodies are negative, then you can wait and watch. Now, if you have raised TSH with a low T3 and T4, it is hypothyroidism. You can do an ultrasound scan. The technetium uptake scan is something that is recommended. We don't tend to do it in older children very often unless we are suspecting something unusual. We do an ultrasound scan just to see whether the gland is enlarged or not. We do antibodies because if you're antibody positive, it's an autoimmune thyroid disease, and if it's negative, it's probably dysharmonogenesis. So the doses of levothyroxine, as mentioned earlier, it's not smaller the base size, the smaller the dose. The smaller the size, the higher the dose. So newborns, it is anything between 10 to 15 micrograms per kilogram per day. 1 to 5 years, it is around 5 to 6 micrograms per kilogram per day. 6 to 12 years, 4 to 5 micrograms per kilogram per day. More than 12, 2 to 3 micrograms per kilogram per day. And post-pubertal, 1.6 to 1.8 micrograms per kilogram per day. So in general, you start off anything between 25 to 37.5 micrograms. And by the time they've reached puberty, they reach a dose of anything between 100 to 200 micrograms per day. If not, a more standard number that one can remember is 100 micrograms per meter square is applicable for all ages. So in summary, hypothyroidism is a very common endocrine condition. You've got both congenital as well as acquired. Congenital has to be looked into. We need to identify these infants as early as possible, and newborn screening is the best way forward, or at least doing a cord TSH will help us identify these infants. Obesity, which is a very common now up and coming condition, and a lot of in the clinic a lot of children present to clinic with obesity. And the first thing which comes to parents' mind is hypothyroidism, and obesity is not the common presentation of hypothyroidism. Any pubertal presentation, one should do a thyroid profile, because as I mentioned, TSH and FSH are very similar and they can cause precocious puberty. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. That was a nice overview of management of hypothyroidism in neonatal and pediatric age groups. So we'll now take on to the questions. We have quite plenty of questions. So is Dr. Satyaprasad sir is available?
Yeah. Go ahead, Yashwant.
Yes, sir. So this is a question is from Dr. Ratan. So his question is,
Okay.
what should be the duration of treatment for Klebsiella UTI in a 45 days female child? And when should be the ultrasound should be done in an infant with UTIs?
So coming to infants, 48 hours old male child. So usually based on the culture, we have to decide about the antibiotic. Usually they require about like 10 to 14 days. So less than 3 months kids, always is better to give IV. Minimum duration is 10 days. But at the same time, if CRP is high, these kids along with urine culture, we have to do blood culture. If CRP is very high, always is better to do LP also. Small babies, if urosepsis is there, sometimes develop bacteremia and meningitis also. That's why we have to do further evaluation. If child is having septicemia or meningitis, sometimes we have to give 21 days also. If blood culture is sterile, if LP is normal, if only urine is showing bacteria, then sometimes 10 days is also enough. That depends upon the susceptibility and sense. But always these kids require further evaluation. Ultrasound we have to do. Even the ultrasound is normal, always you have to do MCH and DNS.
Okay. So the next question is from Dr. Kirti. So how much is the post-residual volume is considered to be significant?
Yeah, this is usually we have to take PVR if more than 10% of the bladder capacity. That is considered sensitive, especially in kids. Even more than 20 ml is also in adults. More than 10 ml is significant, whereas in kids more than 20 ml is significant or 10% of the bladder capacity in bigger kids. And these kids, if PVR is there, significant post-residual volume always requires further evaluation. It may be because of voiding dysfunction. Sometimes bad constipation also can lead to significant PVR. It happens in situation. So further evaluation X-ray abdomen also to look for fecal loaded colon. If that is there, we should treat. If this is something related to second PVR, obviously not before we should treat.
Okay.
Yes,
So yes, sir. Next question is how to follow antenatally detected PC dilatation.
Pardon?
How to
One.
follow antenatally detected pelvic calcial dilatations.
Absolutely. Again, this depends upon the severity of the swelling. If antenatally child is having significant swelling, if APD diameter is more than 10 millimeters, or if child is having hydroerythronephrosis, always we have to do postnatal evaluation. We should do scan on day 3 of life. If child is having APD of less than 10 millimeters, then there is no need to start antibiotic prophylaxis. Repeat again at the 6 weeks of age. If APD is showing swelling more than 10 millimeters, then obvious, or if child is having hydroerythronephrosis, then obviously we have to do further evaluation. We have to do MCUG scan. If MCUG is showing reflux, accordingly what we discussed before, we have to start antibiotic prophylaxis. Then we have to do DMS scan also later. If MCUG is normal, then we have to rule out pelvic junction obstruction. Or if child is having hydroerythronephrosis, then we have to rule out VUJO. So these kids requires ethylene cysteine scan, EC scan. If EC scan shows PUJO or VUJO, then again sometimes that requires surgical correction. If PUJO was significant with decreased function, then definitely they require pyeloplasty. If child is having vesico-ureteric junction obstruction, then sometimes if that is significant with decreased function of the kidney, sometimes that requires surgery. If swelling is less than 10 millimeters, then again do ultrasound only around 3 months of age. Then usually if that is physiological, it is with
Okay. So next question, sir.
Yeah.
So how long, normally how many years of prophylaxis you will advise for UTI children?
Yeah. Again, that depends upon the severity of the reflux. Suppose a reflux is of a low grade, grade 2. If you are dealing UTI child is less than 1 year, irrespective of the grade, whether that is grade 1 or grade 2, always we have to treat with antibiotic prophylaxis. But again, we have to repeat MCUG after 1 year, and we have to do DMSA also. If repeat MCUG shows resolution of reflux, we can stop antibiotic prophylaxis. If repeat MCUG is showing reflux more than grade 2, and if DMSA is showing scarring, then it's better to continue antibiotic prophylaxis. Do yearly DMSA scan, MCUG or DRCG. DRCG is the scan where we can avoid contrast. This is direct radionuclide cystogram. Here, this is less invasive and we are not giving contrast. So, but child should be cooperative. So, DRCG is a good methodology compared to MCUG if child is more than 3 years. If DRCG is normal, obviously we can stop antibiotic prophylaxis. Suppose if child is having high grade reflux with scarring in the kidney, or while giving antibiotic prophylaxis, if child is having recurrent infections, that is an indication to go for surgery. Either duplex, either deflux surgery, where we'll put a gum there, the vascular junction, or ureteric implantation. Most of the times, low grade reflux or even up to grade 3 in 80%, 80 to 90%, it should resolve with age. Only high grade reflux like grade 4, grade 5 reflux, in 50% they require surgical correction. But up to 5 to 6 years of age, if child is not suffering from different UTI, you can continue antibiotic prophylaxis. Then accordingly we have to do investigations.
Okay. So thank you, sir. Those are the questions. And we'll move on to the questions for Dr. Linata ma'am.
Yeah. Please.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. So this is a question from Dr. Satish. So in the neonatal age group, usually if I do thyroid screening on day 5 of life and the TSH is less than normal, is it considered significant?
If it is less than normal, then you will have to look at your free T4 and T4. And if your T4 and free T4 are in the normal range, as I've said in the one of the slides, if your T4 is above 8, or if your T4 is below 8 and your free T4 is below 1.1, you have to treat regardless. But suppose your T4 and free T4 are in the normal range and your TSH is low, what I would suggest is you call back the infant and the family probably a week later and recheck it, just to make sure that you're not missing out a central hypothyroidism.
Okay. So next question, ma'am. This is from Dr. Raju. So can we do thyroid function tests when the child is on thyroxine, or should we have to stop for 21 days and do the thyroid the TFT?
If the child is on treatment, then you will do the test while the infant or child is on treatment. The only time we stop treatment is if we have diagnosed somebody with a possible transient hypothyroidism in infancy. Then once they reach about 2.5 to 3 years of age, then we stop the medication for 6 weeks and recheck it just to make sure that this is not a transient picture. But otherwise, the test is always done while on treatment. And based on the results, you'll either reduce the dose or increase the dose.
Okay. Next question, ma'am. So when should we do thyroid function tests for a newborn born to the hypothyroid mothers who are on thyroxine treatment?
The thyroxine treatment on its own doesn't have any impact on the infant or the newborn. What is concerned, or what we are more worried about, is whether mother has hypothyroidism due to antibodies. Now, either way, you would do your newborn screening, and if you're whether it is a cord blood or your heel prick, and if you're strongly suspicious, you can always repeat the thyroid profile again a week or 2 weeks of age. See, at the end, if you identify it and start treatment before 2 weeks, you're fine. So that is what I would advise. You'd stick to your newborn screening or your thyroid profile to be done before discharge, or at least do one before 2 weeks of age. And based on the results, then you will decide whether you should give treatment or just follow up with a repeat profile again 2 weeks later.
Okay. So next question, ma'am, from Dr. Venkat. He has a 2-month-old child with failure to thrive who is under evaluation, whose thyroid function test showed TSH of 40 and normal free T4 and T3. So whether to start the thyroxine or wait and repeat?
TSH of 40 is significantly high. I would start treatment. See, when you have a failure to thrive and a child with issues and an elevated TSH, provided you're sure that that's done in a reliable lab, I would probably repeat it. But if it's still elevated, I would start treatment.
Okay. So this is again one more question from Dr. Muralidhar. How to treat thyroiditis with hypothyroidism, and what should be the duration of the treatment?
See, thyroiditis, unless the child has got other symptoms of fever and all of that, you would just, based on your thyroid profile, you would start them on levothyroxine and adjust the dose accordingly, but monitor them closely, because when there's the thyroiditis ones are the ones who can usually present with hypothyroidism, but sometimes they can go into a hyperthyroid picture. So it's monitoring is your key and treating according to your levels.
Okay. This is a question from Dr. Sarfaraz. Is there any particular, Dr. Sarfaraz, is there any particular age till when we can do newborn screening for thyroid testing, ma'am?
I don't think so. I've just put me on the back foot. Newborns, see, I think newborn screening, I think cost wise, probably doing a newborn screening in a child where you're suspecting thyroid illness, then I would just go ahead and do a thyroid profile. But you can do a newborn screening even up to a month or 2 months. See, it's just picking up a TSH. And as long as the sample is well taken and sent, it'll just, I pick it up as how much the TSH is. Based on the age of the child or the infant, then the interpretation of that report changes. But I don't think there's any limit that you can't send a newborn screen. But probably once the infant is more than a month of age, I don't think that you can probably just do a thyroid profile.
Okay. So this question is from Dr. Javed. In newborns with who is having a normal TSH, but T4 is high, should we treat these newborns with levothyroxine?
No. So if your TSH is normal and your T4 is also normal or a bit on the higher side, I wouldn't treat them, because you see, first of all, a lot of the labs give us ranges which are of adult ranges, and a lot of infants, and especially in the first 1 to 2 weeks of life, their T4 levels are much higher than what the adults are, and even 14, 15, 16 are actually considered normal. So if your TSH is normal, the child is asymptomatic, and you just have a slightly elevated T4 and T3, the best thing to do is recheck it after about 10 days to see whether things are settling down.
Okay. So one more question, ma'am. If from Dr. Lakshmi, if an adolescent who is not obese is started on thyroxine based on the TSH value of more than 10, how long would you continue?
See, you would do antibodies for this adolescent, and if the child is antibody positive, it means lifelong treatment. See, basically any child who presents with hypothyroidism at that age is most likely going to require treatment for life. Some adolescents during pubertal age might have what we say physiological requirements going up, so they do need some medication. And if those children are antibody negative and the dose they're taking is quite small, then once they've completed their puberty, reach their final adult height, you can consider a trial of medication to see whether they actually need it.
Okay. This question is to Dr. Satyaprasad, sir.
Yeah.
So from Dr. Sharath, sir, he is in a 3-year-old child with a previously 3 episodes of UTI with grade 4 viscoureteric reflex. Child is on cephalaxin prophylaxis for 1 year, and the repeat MCUG showed grade 2 VUR. should I stop prophylaxis or should we continue another year?
Yeah. So the child, obviously you have to do DMSA scan. If DMSA is showing no scarring or minimal scarring, if child is not having breakthrough UTI, because grade 2 reflux, obviously child is more than 2 years, we can stop and see. After stopping prophylaxis, if child develops again repeated UTIs, then again we should restart antibiotic prophylaxis. But after stopping antibiotic prophylaxis, the important thing is you have to change the habits. Like he should pass urine, he or she should pass urine once in 2 hours. We got to treat constipation also. That is one of the commonest things. One of the right now. So we are seeing so many kids with recurrent UTI. Apart from reflux, constipation is the one of the common reasons. So we have to give lots of fiber food, fruits and vegetables. Once in 2 hours, they should go to bathroom and they have to empty the bladder completely. That is the very, very important thing. Most of the time they go to bathroom, but they won't empty the bladder completely. So they have to wait there for 2 to 3 minutes and they have to empty it completely. And important thing is fiber also. Lots of fruits and vegetables. If you follow all those things, after stopping antibiotic prophylaxis also, if lesser grade reflux like grade 1, grade 2, nothing happens.
Okay. So this question is from Dr. Nitin to Dr. Leenata ma'am as well as Satyaprasad sir. So how to treat children with hypothyroidism who are also having nephrotic syndrome? Because this abnormality can be transient and it can be due to nephrotic syndrome. So how to manage this scenario?
Absolutely. See, like in nephrotic syndrome, obviously they tend to lose thyroid binding globulin also, that's fine, because of low albumin. So if you do investigations, usually the report shows as hypothyroidism. But these kids, there is no need to rush and start medication for hypothyroidism. You have to start medication for nephrotic syndrome. Treat with steroids. If child goes into remission, then most of the patients, there is no need to start thyroxine. But if child is having symptoms with high TSH, or if T3, T4 are very low, then sometimes we have to treat with thyroxine also. But most of the times, if you treat nephrotic syndrome properly, if child goes into remission, most of the times we can avoid thyroid.
I completely agree with Dr. Satyaprasad. So basically, it is based on your TSH. Here, you might see, if you see a picture like a central hypothyroidism where your TSH is normal and your T4 is low, then it could be as the protein leak is happening. But if you have an elevated TSH and a significant elevated TSH, because I think between me and Satyaprasad, we have a few patients where TSH is around 50s and 60s. Those are hypothyroids. You can't say that this is related to nephrotic syndrome. But if you have a TSH which is 10, 11, 12, then probably you can wait and watch. These are older children, so it's not going to cause any problem with regards to the brain development. So you can repeat your thyroid profile in a couple of weeks. And if the TSH is still elevated, you might consider treatment. The other thing you can do is if you have an elevated TSH and you're antibody positive for the like TPO and thyroglobulin antibodies, then yes, again, it's not related to a nephrotic syndrome. It's probably that unfortunately they presented at the same time and you would treat your hypothyroidism.
Okay. So the final question, Madam, how frequently should we screen children with congenital hypothyroidism who are all on treatment? From Dr. Sridevi.
So once you start them, once you've diagnosed them and started treatment, I check it once every 2 weeks until you have a normal thyroid profile. So once you have a normal thyroid profile, then you can go according to what the recommendations are. And the recommendations are that you monitor them at least once every 1 to 2 months during the first year of life. During the second year of life, it is between 2 to 3 months. And once they've crossed 2 years, it is around 3 to 4 monthly. And as they grow older, the recommendation is up to 6 months. I usually stick around 4 months because I say 4 months, they come by 6 months at least. And that would continue.